the Let's Talk About It Jewish Literature program that is sponsored nationally by the Public Programs Office of the American Library Association and by the Next Book organization. Let's Talk About It is a reading and discussion series led by local scholars and organized around themes that engage and stimulate audiences. It was pioneered by the ALA in 1982 and has reached hundreds of libraries and more than 4 million people in the past 20 years. Our library is one of 200 participating in the present round of this series. This series, Jewish Literature, Identity and Imagination, aims to expand audiences for Jewish literature nationwide. It is co-sponsored by the Next Book organization, which promotes Jewish literature, culture, and ideas. The project scholar, Jeremy Dorber, Atran Assistant Professor of the Yiddish Language, Literature, and Culture at Columbia University, has identified 6 themes in Jewish literature. Each of the themes includes a series of 5 titles to be read and discussed, accompanied by a scholarly essay. This essay was included in your series packets, but if anyone needs a copy, there are more at the back of the room. There are also copies of biographical pieces on each of the authors in the program and some reviews and interviews. You will also find some evaluation forms on your on the table at the back, and we would appreciate some feedback. We would like to thank the Friends of the Library and Toba Winston of the Missoula Jewish community for all the help they have given us in planning and producing this program. One final announcement, I would like to invite you all to our Jewish cultural film series. We will be showing 4 films. Everything is Illuminated, The Merchant of Venice, The Fiddler on the Roof, and the 4th is still a mystery, but we will have it. They will be shown on each Wednesday following the discussions. Our first will show next Wednesday, the 20th, except for the one that would be shown on the 22nd, which is the day before Thanksgiving. So we've moved that back a week, so it'll be on the 29th instead. And now to our scholar. I would like to introduce you to Matthew Semenoff of the Department of Modern and Classical Languages and Literatures at our University of Montana. Dr. Semenoff earned his PhD in Classics from the University of Wisconsin in 2002. His dissertation focused on how poets construct the relationship between teacher and student in didactic poetry. Before coming to the University of Montana, he had a Mellon postdoctoral fellowship at Carleton College. So, thank you very much for doing this for us and for leading us.
Good evening. Can you all hear me? It's great to see so many people coming out on an evening like this and discussing Jewish literature. This is the first book in our series, and all 5 books will be covering the topics of identity and imagination in Jewish literature. But before we begin discussing, I'd like to first take this opportunity to thank Anita Millard at the Public Library here for all of her hard work and enthusiasm. The original proposal for bringing the series to Missoula was prepared by one of my former colleagues in the Mansfield Library, Marinda McClure. And when she left Missoula this past spring, we were this close to losing the whole project. But fortunately, Next Book and the Missoula Public Library, and especially Anita, were able to pick it up at the last minute and go on with the program. Again, thanks to Anita, and thank you to the Missoula Public Library. I would also like to say a few words about myself and what role I would like to play in this discussion. The whole concept behind this series is to get the community talking about Jewish literature, and therefore I'm going to keep my comments to a bare minimum. I've prepared a few comments, but really I see myself here to facilitate discussion. Professionally, as Anita mentioned before, I'm a classicist specializing in Greek poetry with interests spanning from the Archaic Age, the 8th century BCE, to the Hellenistic age, roughly the 3rd century BCE. So it's quite clear from my area of expertise that I'm on shaky ground a little bit here, but I'm putting myself in this position with the hopes and the excitement with the opportunity of learning from one another about our own reactions to these books. Now on to the theme a little bit. All of these books that we'll read in the series examine in some way the often tenuous, shifting, hazily defined position in which Jews have frequently found themselves, feeling both at home and far away from it, part of a community and estranged from it, feelings of displacement and alienation, feelings that have marked the Jewish experience throughout their history. At the Passover Seder, we retell the story of the Jews' sojourn in Egypt. Sojourn is the word I remember growing up, reading the Haggadah over and over again, and it always seemed a bit euphemistic to me. The story of the Jews' liberation from bondage, however, must be viewed in light of the fact that the mortal leader of that liberation throughout the story is estranged from his community from the very beginning up until the end, when he's prevented from reaching the homeland. More recently, the Jewish experience has been defined by compulsory exiles of the Inquisition, the repeated pogroms throughout the shtetls of Russia, the near genocide of the Holocaust. Since the 6th century BCE, beginning with the Babylonian exile, the history of Jews has been a history of diaspora. It is only fitting that the diaspora longs for home in their literature. And this is one of the reasons why we chose to deal with the theme of homecoming and alienation for the Missoula community in particular, because it seems to be that a majority of our community has come here from someplace at some time, whether recently or more distantly in the past. But many of us are transplants, and even when we're not transplants from one Jewish community to a slightly less visible Jewish community, we could say, we are often transplanted here, and the experience of redefining ourselves within a new community is something that we all have in common. The experience of estrangement and homecoming, while integral to the history of the Jews, is not the exclusive domain of the Jews. The return home narrative is one of the oldest story patterns of the Western world, to bring in my own field of expertise, and to make but one comparison. One of the oldest surviving Greek poems, the Odyssey, is the story, of course, of one man's struggle to return home, only to find out that the home that he's so longing for no longer exists, and that once you return home, it's a different place than the one from which you've left. While Odysseus' story is perhaps the best known homecoming tale from Greek literature, there was once also an epic tradition that recounted the returns home of other Greek heroes. Today we know the name and summary of the poem, called the Nostoi. This is the Greek word from which the English word nostalgia comes from, our longing for home, our pain for home. In the Nostoi, this epic poem retells various stories, as well as the story of Agamemnon's homecoming through references in the Odyssey, as well as Aeschylus's tragic vision of that homecoming. So this is a story pattern that has great antiquity to it. On another note, a little anecdote, as I was leaving my class Tuesday afternoon, a Greek civilization class in which we were reading and discussing the Odyssey, the class was followed by a Bible and reading the Bible as a literature class, in which the professor mentioned, as I carried out my copy of the Odyssey, that he was in fact talking about the role of Jacob and his character in the Hebrew Bible as similar to Odysseus. So this is something cross-cultural, we might say, this sort of homecoming story. The return home after a period of separation and the mix of hope and anxiety that attends it is perhaps as close as we might come to a universal experience. Yet although this experience has universal qualities associated with it, the particulars will always differ. The tension between the universal and the particulars is something that Hoffman notes early in her memoir. Talking to an old friend of the family in a New York cafeteria provides the opportunity to hear another perspective about her parents, prompting her to reflect that, quote, "It is the first time I get some glimpses of how my parents, whose history has always made them archetypical to me in my eyes, have a particularity even within this meta-story. This woman is different from my mother, divorced, working on her own, tougher. Her daughter is as different from me as I can imagine, a saleswoman who takes dance lessons and doesn't care a whit about the past. And this also comes as a surprise. We should be more like each other. We have been molded by the same thing." This is page 25 of the book. Hoffman's surprise reminds us that as much as we expect people to be shaped similarly by shared experiences, we are all individuals who internalize those experiences differently. This is a concept to note as we discuss the memoir as well as the other books in this series. We can gain insight through the particularities of Eva's experiences in Lost in Translation. We can apply them to our own experiences, but we must still accept the possibility that we might have composed a different narrative based on the same life. Hoffman remarks on this herself when contemplating her friend Danuta's question, whether she regrets leaving Poland, on page 240. "How can I possibly answer," she asks herself. "I no longer know who would have lived the life I might have lived there." Identity again produces a tension between the individual and the group. Hoffman's memoir is not simply the story of her attempt to position herself within various communities, whether in Poland, Vancouver, while in Houston at Rice University, or during her graduate studies at Harvard. It is also the story of her trying to maintain a voice, that is, an identity of an individual. This memoir is defined by margins. Hoffman's life from its very beginning is a life on the margin. Her family's experiences in the war, in which Jews are saved by non-Jews and Jews are betrayed by Jews, result in a position caught between Poland and the Soviet Union, Jewish and Catholic. Once she arrives in Canada, Eva struggles to pull herself from the margins by association with Vancouver's community of recent Polish immigrants, but wealth keeps her from accomplishing it. As an immigrant child, she is broadcast on the radio as a social critic of Canadian culture, and as an adult she remains a cultural critic, albeit one of literature. Reflecting on her own life as a child, Eva's memories are marked by status, aware of all of her friends' positions, for example, the Orlovskys' upper-class aristocratic background, and still sensitive to the peculiar relationship between her mother and Ciocia Bronia, who in the war saves Eva's mother, but after becomes her maid. This is discussed on pages 21 and 22. As an adult, Eva struggles to identify the hidden markers that distinguish American social classes. We're left in the end wondering at what point Eva moves beyond the borders and the margins, whether she's ever makes it to the center, to a home. I've already taken too much time reflecting on this from my own perspective. For the remainder of, we have until 9, is that correct? I was thinking that for the next 45 minutes to an hour, it would be easier to circle around these tables so that you can discuss in smaller groups questions that I've prepared. There should be lots of copies. These questions are really meant only as a starting place for discussion. You should feel free to look through the questions before starting your group discussions. Look through the questions, that is. And decide on which ones you'd like to discuss as a small group. You should also try to reserve some time for your own questions if you have them. And in about 45 minutes or so, depending on how things are going, we'll come back as a large group and discuss some of the responses that you all had as in your smaller groups. So, have at it. Those of you who are on the fringes over here can find a few places around the tables. Or you can make your own group.
People on the margins, do you mean?
Yes. Those are the outliers.
room over here. Here's, we can just discuss it among themselves.
Is there anyone that doesn't mind being taped during discussion? Or does nobody want to do it? That's fine too. Would you mind being taped during discussion? Take one publicity.
I got this phone. Number 6.
Yeah. Do you want to be taped? Do you mind to be taped?
One of the bigger tables? Yeah. They'll come and treat it. Oh, great. Yay. We're not shy. Well, see how far we get. I like the Fender Roll, that came out too. Fender Roll. How did you read so fast? Thinking back over the memoir, which experiences do you consider the most formative? Literary,
Yes, precisely. Although I think I am.
experiences or aspects of his life. I'm interested. What experiences do you think so we can kind of skip around. You want to start with 6? Since 6 was more the start.
All right.
I mean, the title Lost in Translation. I mean, when I first read this, or first saw this book, Lost in Translation about language, that it intrigued me about how language conveys things, how cultures convey things. And so I was reading it in more of that kind of flow about what language, and a lot of times she speaks about certain words and
That word for nostalgia.
yeah, I thought was interesting, the homecoming, longing for home or whatever.
I didn't hear a whole lot of her longing to go back, really. I didn't hear
Well,
that.
she never wanted to leave in the first place.
Yeah.
Right.
And then she kept thinking after she got to Vancouver, I don't like it here, I'd rather be back in Poland, Poland is better.
Yeah, but
Which
that's
surprised
a
me in a
normal
way.
childlike response.
Yeah.
True.
You're
But
13 movie.
later on, she still held some of those same views when she was older and had a better chance to realize what life in the new world was like. And she didn't seem to be able to be honest with herself. I mean, think of what she lived in Poland. She had a family where there was one bedroom. The mother and father had to sleep in the living room on a couch.
Right.
Whereas, although it may have been meager when they were in Vancouver, they had a couple of bedrooms, they had a house. Later on, it took a while to get there, but she was able to live in I think, a much better station in life, standard of living perhaps.
Yeah, when you say station, I think
Standard of living.
material, standard of
Right.
living versus, because what was her station in?
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't even really advertise, I mean, even then, after the war, they don't make it, I mean, they don't advertise that they're Jewish. They don't, I think people are aware, they know, but you don't want to draw attention to it. Because I think the anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish feeling is still there, and to this day. And what I was able to do too, when they made, in 1976, I was in Poland as an exchange student through the International 4-H Youth Exchange. And what she talks about, and I should have took a highlighter, about the Polish nationalism or idea of a Pole. I forget what, you remember that at the start of the book?
I remember
About
what you're talking about.
the fullness or the, kind of the, I don't know, there was just an extreme pride in, and he touched on it a little bit when he was talking about where is Poland in the map of Europe. Well, when I was there, it was still kind of Cold War. You didn't have open conversations. This is 1976, okay? So that's 40, 30 years ago. Okay, but Poland is like a wasteland between what two countries? Russia and Germany. But they were conquered how many times?
Yeah.
Forever, but they were able to hold on to their language and their identity and their culture. Even though being wiped off the map, being recreated, being tromped on. I mean, there's just this pride of being Polish, and the influence then of that, even though, and that, when I say pride of being Polish, there's kind of a pride of being Jewish for her. I mean, so we don't go to synagogue, but those 2 days, and we only do things cross ourselves. That's what I thought. We only cross ourselves but we're going to stop doing that. We're gonna, so we assimilate to a certain level, but we still identify on who we are, and that is being Jewish. You don't get rid of that cloak. I don't think you ever do.
I got the feeling, as far as I got in the book, that she didn't really feel comfortable in America. She didn't feel comfortable in her skin in America. That's the way it felt to me. And she mentioned something like that about how I can't remember exactly how she says it, but she just doesn't feel like she looks at American culture or North American culture from the outside, and her comments on it are almost as if she really never got there, as if she's continued to identify herself as a Pole. And in terms of the Judaism, what struck me was, I think post-World War II, I think a lot of Jews that came to this country, and even before, kind of just laid low, like you said. And I know I came from a rationalist Jewish household in which religion really didn't enter into it, My father.
But you never gave it up. I mean, but there's a
No.
recognition.
Do you still consider yourself what is your primary way of looking at yourself? As Jewish? As American? I mean, how do you see, when you define yourself, how do you define yourself?
I think I define myself first as an American, because I think, when you're really young, you can see the flag and identify with the flag. But as I developed, more rationality and could view the world, I saw myself as a Jew. What's interesting, this isn't a feminist discussion, but I only viewed myself as a woman slightly. I saw myself more as a Jew than a woman. Isn't that interesting?
See, and I think it has a big impact. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I think there's a identification. My friend that I work with, she was married to I'll say what it is, okay. She was married to a man that was, his household was, the father was Jewish, the mother was, let's just say Christian, for lack of and he was raised then Christian, right? But my friend, whose son is what? Half Jewish. Okay.
If you can be one half Jewish.
Yeah.
I find this part of the discussion rather unusual, because if you identify yourself as a Jew, as a culture, or as a race, that's one thing, and I don't believe that that's what Jews are. I think of Judaism as being a religion. And it transcends more than that, I understand that, but it's hard for me to say, well, you're half Jewish and half American.
Judaism started out as a way of life. It didn't start out as a religion, per se. It started out as a way of life, a way of organizing the Hebrews. And then, of course, it developed rituals and other ways of dealing with things. And but it started out as a way of organizing life, organizing the day, organizing the calendar. And then it became, much more religious. And I think if you look at it as a religion primarily, you're looking at it from kind of the top down rather than from the bottom up. And I think, of course, converts, of course, are become part of the religion, and of course that's the way, that's the practical aspect of it. But it's also a way of looking at the world. I think being Jewish it's a way of thinking of society and be good to. My father was a rational Jew. He believed in social ethics. He believed in social justice.
Wasn't that a large result of the war too? Because I know when Israel was actually established, the motivation to establish Israel was not to have a place where Jews could worship. It was more to have a place where Jews could live.
Could be safe. Yeah.
Safely. And that, I grew up in a half-Jewish high school, and the way the people talked about me, around me all the time was, we're going to go and help Israel succeed, but it was not a religious thing in any way. It was a nationalist thing. It was that religious ideal was totally overwhelmed by nationalism, I think, when it came to the whole idea of Israel, starting off with Herzl and the whole birth of Zionism after the Dreyfus.
Let me clarify something. I think in my family, the scientific, rational Jew who believed in mitzvot, the classic struggle, came with much earlier than that, in the homeland in Romania, and the pogroms. And I remember hearing stories about how the rabbis were in cahoots with the Cossacks. And so my family, anyway, way back then became, who needs the rabbis? Forget it. They're doing us more harm than good. And so they moved away from the organized religion, but they kept their Jewishness, and they kept the righteousness, and they kept the mitzvot.
And some of the rituals, I guess, like Eva does. I mean, the parents also are not religious, but they still do Passover, and that is, I think.
Yeah, because she talks about, but they still do, like you said, Passover. There's a couple main moments where they practice their faith. I mean, my God, her parents are almost killed during the Holocaust, but they survive, and so if you're. And they talk about that now, too, is if you feel persecuted, if somebody from outside were going to attack us for whatever reason, this little table, we would bond together to defend ourselves. And I think that's what happened, too, when you speak about the people.
And I think the way the world sees Jews is also way beyond a religion. I mean, anti-Semitism isn't based, especially today. Maybe in the Middle Ages, it was based on the Jews killed Jesus. But it's not that, and yet it's still hardcore. I mean, anti-Semitism is still out there. Why? It's not the religion that's doing it. It's the whole thought of the people become encapsulated. So it's much more of a lineage. It's a lineage.
Yes.
It's like in Judaism. You said the father was Jewish. Well, the children wouldn't be Jewish then.
Not according to popular custom.
Yeah.
Not according to popular custom. Yeah.
And that's I've always found very fascinating.
But then she makes comments, and this is no criticism. It's just but comments about the child's high forehead. So she's looking at features that she labels Judaism. And I think, well,
I always think that's an interesting.
Why?
Semitic is the area. Arabs are Semitic. So
That's right.
When you look at a lot of the Arabs, they look Jewish. Seriously, they look Semitic. I always thought that was interesting. That somehow that never occurred to anybody.
Yeah. But Eva gets persecuted in slight ways, but I can't recall. But she's maybe at the start of the book. What are those moments? She can't have certain friends, or is that more of a caste?
One of the girls in her class asked her if she was part of an unusual term. It wasn't the Hebraic faith, I think she said.
Hebraic.
That was And she took that, she said, I didn't ever consider that person as a friend from then on.
But then she's a home alone. I remember this scene too from the book with her little sister, and she knows at age whatever 12 or 13 that we kind of pretend or that we just do this, whether it's spoken or not. But she pretends to. Well, she does it, but it's just for her an action you do because you're Jewish. But the parents leave for a long week or vacation, and the little girl starts prays to.
Light switch.
Yeah, because she doesn't have a cross to, And she's telling her sister, well, we just trying to make a smaller child understand, well, it's really, this is not what we believe.
Well, Eva herself had those same problems when she was in Poland. As she drove by a cathedral on a bus, she surreptitiously made the sign of the cross. So she was going through those same kinds of
I think it was also safer too, don't you?
What's that?
It was also safer.
Well,
Because
except that she
everyone
did
else
it,
was
nobody
doing
could see it.
I missed that.
Yeah, she did it. She said she
Maybe
kind
she
of
was
covered it up.
she was having secrets from other people.
But then
Well,
she
yeah.
says there that in the buses or the tram or something, that she saw other people also doing it
Yes.
secretively. So it wasn't an overt thing. I think everybody...
I got the impression she did it to keep, so that her parents wouldn't know, or somebody that would tell her parents.
Just to interject a little bit of humor here, I don't know if people here have seen Mermaids, and I love that scene where Cher walks by and Winona Ryder is sitting there with her shrine of Jesus and Mary and everything. And she walks by, and then Cher comes back and looks in, and I forgot the name of the character. Emily, we're Jewish, and she walks back, down the hallway. I love that scene. I think part of what she dealt with was Jews as being others. I think that's been this source of anti-Semitism,
Yes.
even way back, Greek times, like he said, being the other and having different customs and encouraging education no matter what.
And the one thing that kept them so strong as a race, as a family or a tribe, was the one thing that made them outsiders.
Right, exactly.
Because they kept
Exactly.
their customs. Things rituals in their lives that go back thousands and thousands of years that they base the calendar. They base their calendar around. And it was their means of survival and identity, but it was also that dividing line. It was the one thing that made them the other.
Yeah.
And I think even more than just accepting Jesus or not, I think it was this whole system that Jews have kept with them throughout, their
Right.
whole long history.
They have differences.
Yeah.
And the other thing I think she dealt with as a double whammy was, of course, being a Pole in America. And I've known several Poles in my day, and they have such a sense of national pride.
Yeah, I
It's
was
just
thinking that
astounding.
before you said it.
It's
There's
astounding. It's like,
It's a strong belief.
it's more than I've seen of any other
Yeah.
country, even Israelites, it's been, or Israelis. It's just an amazing sense of who they are, and they have such an intellectual culture, and they are very proud and very, I had a mathematics teacher in high school. I went to a boarding school in New York, and his name was Mr. Karmelik. Adolf Karmelik, his name was.
Adolf.
Yeah, Karmelik. Well, it's a name,
Yeah.
And he would tell us stories about Poland. He would tell us stories about he worked on the construction crews after World War II to rebuild Krakow, maybe. I can't remember which city he said, but they're they're imbued with such
So he's a young
Polishism.
man after World War II.
Yes. Yes.
But she talks about stolat. That's the cheer you do with vodka.
What?
Stolat. That's you wish another 100 years. That 100 years stolat. And everybody just.
But if you're
knows it.
Jewish, it's also l'chaim.
Oh, l'chaim.
I think though that they identify themselves as Poles. Just the fact that they moved from Lvov to Krakow. They moved because one became part of the USSR, and
Right,
they identified themselves
Yeah,
as
I would
Poles
agree with that.
there as well.
Yeah. I'd like to make two comments, if I may. The first one has an answer to a comment you made, that she didn't ever feel as part of the United States. And I
Seemed
think
that
that's
way.
inaccurate. I think today she does.
Yes.
Yes,
She had
yes.
trouble getting there, but even here in the last page, she said, "I breathe in the fresh spring air. Right now, this is the place where I'm alive. How could there be any other place?"
Right.
So
But I think she
certainly-
feels
No, I
that
agree
way
with
in
you.
the
I
US,
agree with-
But I don't think she feels that way in Vancouver. I think in Vancouver,
Well, she was very young in Vancouver. She
lived
wasn't
there for
far from
25
Poland.
or 30
Is she,
years.
is she a U.S. citizen?
Yeah,
Oh, probably now, yeah, I would imagine.
and getting
By the way,
back-
I agree with you.
Yeah, okay. We haven't talked really about the whole idea of the book, Lost in Translation, how much words play a
Yeah.
part
Yes.
in the discussion of her life here, and how it was so difficult for her to understand what it was like not living in Poland, and to come to America. And I noticed she didn't talk much about Canada. She just talks about America, and includes Vancouver as being America.
Yeah, she
But
mentioned.
she doesn't make a big distinction there between
What
Canada.
does she say about, since I haven't read into the second two parts of the book, but the transition or the language? Because she has to
Let me
learn
tell you,
learn
this is-
English. Go ahead, yeah.
We
That's
had
a
a
big
discussion
topic.
before we got
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
before the rest of us came.
Okay.
And it was talking about how she goes on and on and on and on. And here's a quote that I like very much. She said, "When I write, I want to use every word in the lexicon to accumulate a thickness and weight of words so that they yield the specific gravity of things. I want to recreate from the discrete particles of words that wholeness of a childhood language that had no words." And it seems to me she sits and has written this book with a great big dictionary.
oh yeah.
And she went through that dictionary and used every single word in it, and it was that thick. And she wanted to make sure she really...
She has a very rich vocabulary.
But
I
it
mean, there were a
appears to
couple
me
of
she
words
uses it,
there.
though, almost unnecessarily.
Oh, do you think so?
I think so. I think she uses it too
Just,
much.
just to use a
Yeah.
different word.
Yes, yes.
Because of how she feels about language.
Yeah,
But she also talks about having to say words out loud.
Oh, I do.
Once you say them out loud, then they acquire their full meaning. If you're just reading it towards the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
Grimaced face.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but every immigrant that ever goes to any other country has to do the same thing. And maybe that's her point. Maybe just saying that all immigrants go through the same process. I got the impression that she was talking more about herself and the great difficulty she had because of her relationship between Polish and English. And we also talked about another great
Pet peeve?
English author whose
Oh, yes.
first language was not English but Polish. That's Joseph Conrad.
Conrad, who writes the most beautiful.
One of the greatest authors in the English language,
In
yet
the
he didn't know it until he was well into his 20s.
20s, yeah.
So
And
his
he-
transformation was far quicker, I guess, and I think greater, but and I won't.
I think language for someone who leaves their environment for another environment, and I'm an immigrant to the U.S., and I came at the age of almost 30. Well, I speak the same language you do, but I didn't. I had a totally different vocabulary. I had different cultural concepts that were embedded in my language.
Of course.
And you had them, and I had to learn those cultural concepts, even though I had watched I'd watched American movies, I'd read American books. Those concepts that are embedded in the language that is American, I did not really face until I actually came to live here.
Very good point.
So what kind of things come to mind?
Well,
just as a-
vocabularies are different. You know, if you have a baby overseas, you just have totally different things for him.
You have nappies.
Just vocabulary.
that you have over here. But I think other things, I mean, just like little words, like in the South, I lived in the South for a while. Oh,
Well, that
anyway.
explains the problem right there.
That too. Those were some cultural
You
concepts.
betcha.
I have the same difficulty, actually.
But
I live in the South.
they have, well, the English say just now. When are you coming? Just now. What does just now mean? You know, people have looked at me here and said, well, what is just now? Well, my kids know exactly what I mean when I say just now. And I know what I mean. there's
Well,
a
how about this?
phrase in the South.
If an American asks you how you are, they don't really want to know. It's just a greeting.
Yeah.
It's just like saying
Hi.
hello. Whereas, I'm not sure where you're from, but let's say an English person, if they,
We would say, how do you do?
well,
Which is, it's kind of the same thing.
Well,
if you do say how
I do okay,
not
you know.
expecting an answer.
well, then that was for, let's go to other Europeans, though. If
Okay.
you were asked how you are, they will tell you,
Yes, oh yeah.
because
I
they
know.
think you really want to
My
know. But
Portuguese
Americans,
family.
no, I don't want to know. Why are you telling me this? Well, you asked. No, I didn't. I just said, how are you? So there would be a cultural.
It's like in Southern American,
Same word,
you
different
have,
idea.
you have the phrase fixing to. I am fixing to do.
Well, in the South, you say I'm fixing to fix.
I'm fixing to. And I'm sure I heard this before I ever came here, or maybe not. Maybe I never watched a movie that had that particular phrase in it. And but it has a very narrow meaning. And I will use that meaning when I will use those words when I want that very narrow meaning. I will find myself, it has enriched my vocabulary.
Yeah.
Meaning behind words, meaning behind phrases.
Because words become, it's like Iris Murdoch said, words are so important, when she was losing her ability to use words, and she lost the words, she was losing the words, and to her that was the worst thing. Not that she was losing her memory, but she was losing the words.
My mother was an immigrant to this country. Well, anyway, she came here from Russia, and she came when she was 10 years old. And she never went to school. She came from a very wealthy family that during the revolution lost everything. I mean, everything. And when she got here, well, first of all, in Russia, she read a lot of our classics. She read Mark Twain, she mentioned him, Dickens, in Russian.
Yeah, like
Yeah,
Eva
she
does.
mentioned,
Yes.
what is it, Tom, the old Civil War book, Tom, old.
Or Uncle Tom's
Uncle Tom,
Cabin.
thank you.
And when she came to this country, she was like, she immersed herself in the language. And till the day she died, she spoke fluent Edwardian Russian from when she left. She spoke fluent Russian, but she developed an English that had no accent. She would go to sleep and she would say these words out loud to herself until she fell asleep. She won English prizes in elementary school. She was the, principal and president of her senior class. She went into it with everything she had, and I know that she considered herself American, but she was Russian. She had many Russian emotionalities, many Russian habits, and many Russian ways of communicating. And even though she dove into the language, she kept. Russians have like a jillion words, like the Eskimos. They have a jillion words for snow. And she would just tell us some, And when we went to Russia to visit the family, she was the only one who really knew Russian. So she was sitting there communicating, Russian to you, English to you, Russian to you. I have no idea how she did it. But to her, those languages were part of who she was. I always thought it was fascinating.
Well, was Eva able to, she's intelligent, was she able to pick up the language fairly quickly? What did she?
Yes, I think she was.
Yes, because I
She said
identified with that
after being in
about my mother.
the country for about 6 months, she had a vocabulary of about 600 words. Or maybe not 6 months, but very quickly.
Good, quickly,
But
yeah.
throughout the book, she keeps talking about it, trying to learn more and more and more. And I think she probably had a vocabulary that would rival anybody in this room.
You betcha.
Or even many put together.
Certainly mine.
Well, I had to look up a couple of words, and they
Me
were
too.
new.
I said I read this book with a dictionary.
And there were words, and there were words that she used that were very interesting, because usually if you're reading a book and it has a word you're not familiar with, you can still sort of deduce its meaning.
Right.
There were a couple of words where I just was
No.
lost. I couldn't.
They weren't in a
figure out what the
context,
meaning
really. They were
was.
their
Yeah.
own meaning.
Exactly right.
So those were definitely words you had to go and look up in a dictionary and see what they meant.
And my mother, throughout her whole life, would correct our grammar, would correct our pronunciation, correct our spelling. I mean, she was 90 when she died. She did it till the day
So
she
she had
died.
much more of a preciseness
Believe me.
to this
I believe you.
Yes, and she believed in the sanctity of language. She did not believe, sanctity is not the right word, she believed in the purity of the language. She didn't believe that language should necessarily be mutable in a dumbing down way. She believed that there should be language that is pure, that is like a song and should be spoken properly. And she would rail at the television, she would, the accent is on the first syllable.
Eva wants to be a pianist, okay, and that's her training and all this, and so she talks about they go to Arthur Rubinstein's
Yes.
concert. He was Polish, so he's coming back, and you can't get a ticket or what. Now, was that the pianist that the movie, the pianist was made off of, the Holocaust?
I don't
He
think
wasn't
so.
the same Jewish pianist.
I don't think so.
Oh,
I don't think
okay.
Arthur Rubinstein had that experience.
Immigrated to this country, I think, in the 20s.
Oh,
young
okay,
boy.
so,
And became quite a wonderful pianist, although he was a prodigy. And he became very, this is a sideline, of course, he felt so, so good about himself that he would play these wonderful pieces and make big mistakes that he knew about, but he said, the average person doesn't know, so I don't really care. And it
That's a little
wasn't until
snobby, isn't
he
it?
actually grew up into maturity. Now, this is when he was in his teens. And
Yeah,
he was
well, that
really
sounds like a teenage thing to
but
do.
then he began to realize that music is to be played as best as you can, and if you have that capability to make it perfect, then you should do so. And that was what his later quest in life was.
is
to make
perfection.
Because music
You know.
itself is a kind of language.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I liked her
And it
melody
shouldn't be dismissed that the Poles were incredible mathematicians.
But look how when she starts learning the piano and they go for that hearing test at the beginning, how Marek is that how you pronounce it? Okay, he's perfect on catching the nuances, which she is very bad at, but she is the more talented pianist because she feels the music.
Right.
So I think, and that's her attitude to language. You have to feel the language. And I think that's why she is so miserable, because the language, she can't feel the language in the beginning. It's an intellectual exercise and no more.
I got the same impression, and
Yes.
I was thinking in terms of when she's a child and she's talking about her love for words and everything like that. And there's a passage around page 28 and 29, where she begins to talk in terms of the words being equated to reality, and so
You have to say them out loud.
she has
Yes.
to be. I mean, the sign and the signifier have to be identified with one another. And when she comes to to Vancouver and then later to the U.S., she is missing the gap. Like she'll see a word for river she talks about, and it doesn't have the same. The sound doesn't sound in a way that evokes the ideas of what a Polish river is. And she's talking about the books that she checks out from the library as a child, and says that the yellowed pages I take out of the library draw me into them into a trance, but only on the condition that they create a convincing mimetic illusion. I feel subtly cheated by Alice in Wonderland because it's all pretend, a game, and what interest is that? My reading is all mixed up, and it's not so long after I read Alice that I'm given War and Peace. This is something I should read carefully. My parents convey to me a classic, something very important, but the usual discouraging invocation of duty has no effect on me this time. I don't notice that War and Peace is a book, something I'm reading. Surely this is just life. And so when she comes to, she moves, and she's speaking English, she no longer has that connection to reality, and so it's as if her inability to put words together and get the meanings from the words is what kind of removes her from the reality of her world. But
Doesn't everybody feel that when they read, though? That it's
Yeah.
that you fall into the book and it becomes your reality?
Yeah. I have a wonderful anecdote about
sometimes.
the...
I mean, if it's
What hopes?
sometimes you hope.
Escapism.
Sometimes you're.
Yeah.
Sometimes
I don't read
you're
those other books.
Yeah.
She was talking about the word in English for river is not the same as in Polish, and I have I think a good anecdote about that, about how words should sound like things. There was a interview with, dear me, I can't think of her name. She was a Jewish, Elke Sommer, and Merv Griffith was the interviewer, and they were sitting there and talking about words, and Merv Griffith, tongue-in-cheek, was saying, you know, let's take the word butterfly. Think of butterfly. Doesn't it sound so very butterfly? And that'll give you a beautiful image. And take the word papillon. Papillon, same word. It's a beautiful thing. It's ethereal and so on. And what's the word in Spanish? Anyway, he went through the three words. But anyway, Elke Sommer was sitting, it was on television, and she was saying, so what is so wrong with Schmetterling?
Well, she's right. You know, to our ears, it sounds
That's right.
foreign.
That's the whole point of this. But it didn't have the same meaning.
There's can I just borrow your
Oh,
book?
sure,
Mine
go
is
ahead.
still in the car. She has a word
Mariposa.
here.
Mariposa.
Mariposa, that is
yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah, so all these are beautiful words for a beautiful
They're all
thing,
romance
but
languages that you're
Schmetterling
talking
doesn't really
about.
give you the same.
Romance.
This word she has here, I have no idea how to pronounce it. It's disconnection. It's the word for a word that adds to nostalgia the tonalities of sadness and longing. This is a word which it's translated, and she translates it later as nostalgia. And
She uses that again and
yeah,
again and again.
but it isn't nostalgia, because we have a word for it in Portuguese, and it's saudade. Saudade, and it means so much more than
Say it again,
nostalgia.
I'm sorry.
Saudade.
Saudade.
Saudade in Portuguese.
Saudade?
It's S-A-U-D-A-D-E-S. Saudade.
Yeah.
And it just
Saudade.
it conveys so much more than nostalgia, because it does convey that longing for that wanting to be.
My mother had a word like that.
Yeah, and I think of all the languages that I have studied, English is the only one that I've come into contact with that doesn't have a word that exactly means that concept, that doesn't encapsulate without you saying nostalgia, but you also always have to add there's more to it than
Yes,
nostalgia.
nostalgia can be without sadness.
Yes. So it just really struck me, because saudade is a word I've been trying to translate for 40 years, and I have never been able to adequately translate it for anyone.
Is that where you're from?
Well,
Brazil?
my parents were. I grew up, I spoke only Portuguese until the age of 5. And
Really?
learned English when I went to school, so, yeah.
Wow.
So,
Thinking back over the memoir, what experiences do you think the most formative for Eva? What experiences? Obviously, her leaving Gdynia. You know, you mentioned you were in Poland in '71. I actually was in Gdynia 2 years before she left there,
Oh, okay.
in that port city. She didn't spend any time there, but that was the same year that the Russians left Poland. They had been occupying Poland for that period of time. In 1957, they left, and of course they left the communists in complete control, so there was no worry about what was going to happen. And it was, I could see why anybody would want to leave. It was not a very pretty country. But anyway, besides her actual leaving, what do you consider the most informative? Her acceptance to rice?
Which question is that?
First one.
Oh, number one. Okay.
Most important, yeah.
I found it interesting, she went from Vancouver all the way down to Texas.
Me too.
My thought, Marcia and I discussed this a little bit, I'll bet she got a good
Scholarship.
scholarship to go there.
Yeah, but I also got the feeling she was getting as far away from her roots at that point.
Well, that's as far as you can get. I think.
Exactly. So that she could,
Yeah, because
individuate.
it would be more different to go to Rice than it would be to go to New York.
Or Harvard.
Yes,
or,
yes.
Any of that.
Exactly.
She could have gone to
The
Ole Miss if she really
cultural
wanted to
difference,
get away from it.
Yeah. And Rice, of course, is a fabulous school.
Yes.
But it's really, if you look at culture, it's really the opposite of what, that's the feeling I got.
What literary techniques has she used to emphasize these experiences?
Oh my gosh.
Well, first of all, just a pure memoir, narrative, she describes. But then she launches into these things that I had trouble with. She started philosophizing and went on and on and on. And I confess that I got lost in a lot of that.
It was a lot of work for me, and I consider myself a fairly intelligent person and reader, but it got to be, I'd have to read pages over and over and over again and just think about them, and I don't want to work that hard when I read.
Yeah.
Like you
I
said,
gotta work hard.
I'm out
What
of
is her
college.
relationship with her mother? I mean, I sense more, I could grasp her relationship with her father. It's like, he's an independent self-starter, he wants a son, he wants her to get into sports. So and being the oldest of the sibling group, it's like she can be independent, but I think because of that take from her dad, or her father, that makes her also who she is.
I think she's brought
Independent.
up genderless.
She says he rides with her on the motorcycle.
Oh, yeah, that was a great
That
example.
the fastest it will go. And he wants her to learn to swim, so he throws her in the water.
Right.
Yeah.
And he lives apparently a lot on the edge, at least in her early years he does. And he fills her life with a little bit of excitement that probably a lot of young people don't get
And in
from their
that
fathers.
period of time too, so we're talking the 40s, 50s, and her formative years, he's creating a really independent, I think, strong thinking,
Yes.
willed woman. Compared to the expectations for the daughter, it's all those that she has more of a feminine feature and
Her sister.
Yeah, the sister and all that.
Do you remember, she would go to, I think, going to the library all the time with her mother was was formative. But then she talks about going to this park that's part of the city, and she talks about what was for her the most perfect moment, even now when she writes about it years later. It was her most perfect moment when she was under this huge oak tree, and she just said she feels like she's at home.
Was it oak or chestnut?
It was a chestnut because she picks up a chestnut and she says
I remember reading that passage and going, under the spreading chestnut, whatever the melody is, I remember singing that when I read the passage. Not to correct you, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay, I didn't know.
So it's kind of, when you were, just sharing that, I was thinking, just your perception of that. So her relationship with her father is just intense, one-on-one, but the relationship perhaps with the mother is more of a social, that she takes her out to experience other people, because she watches the interaction. So she's seen more social interaction from her mother than her father on how you approach people or deal with people. What was one scene, because, and this one comes back again to the Jewishness. Somebody makes a Jewish comment, and even though they're friends, and those kind of things when you're young and you're very impressionable and you see what your parents do, they impact you. Like the first time you realize your parents lie, because you never...
My parents never lie.
Or tell the whole truth, or what is slight, yeah. Those are really impacting moments, and she finds this, even though she's friends with this woman, she's very critical about this woman, how she made some kind of Jewish, anti-Jewish comment.
Her name, the lady called Penny.
Penny,
Who's
yeah.
a good friend of her mother's.
Uh-huh, yeah.
And Penny is the lady that she calls when her sister is praying to her life's
That's right.
and she gets very unsatisfactory
That's right.
answers.
It's not doing any harm, let her do it.
Not impacting.
Okay.
Here's a really good, I think, a good question. Does Eva ever become comfortable with language, either Polish or English? I got the feeling that after a transformation, she does question it. She said, do I really understand Polish anymore? She started thinking and dreaming in English. And she had trouble sometimes thinking, going back purposely, thinking in Polish. And she said it's not the same as I understand it in English now. So I feel that she did actually make.
She was always caught between the two. I don't think she ever, much as she mastered English, and she did to write that book and everything else she did, I don't think she ever quite, that the emigration experience, going to a new country and a new language, threw her off, or threw her out of her comfort zone, and she never regained it.
I didn't get that out of this at all.
Oh, you didn't?
No, because as I say, she actually says that in here, that I came to a point where I don't even remember Polish. And I think only
But do you think that she's entirely comfortable in English?
Oh, sure, look at how she writes. I mean,
Does-
that's her
But,
I don't know.
but you see,
I don't know if
yeah,
it's comfort.
I think there's stylistic excellence there, that there's good grammar, but is she really comfortable?
Well, then what you're saying is she doesn't feel comfortable with language, period.
Yes. I think that losing her language, that she continuously strived then to completely master English so as she could get English as her language. But I don't know, it was just, I'm a follower of George Orwell, who was all for the good old Anglo-Saxon word and make it short and sweet and everybody will understand it and don't dumb down.
Absolutely.
And that, to me, this is a beautifully crafted work. But do you feel that this is just pouring out of her?
Well, you're asking two different questions. First of all, you're asking me if she ever became comfortable in English, and I think she did. But I think in writing, I think she's just throwing words in there because she can. Because she does have this great command of English language. So I would certainly agree with that. She's not, she could say the same thing much better, much more succinctly.
There's another idea there, at least to me, because when it's talking about her early years, and she goes so often to the library, she talks about the fact that she makes up almost her own language. And then she is always struggling, even then when she just only is, Polish is her only language. Even then, she's struggling between this language that she tries to put together and...
Because she's trying to put all words into one word. She's trying to make
It's like she's trying to get her arms around every uttered or written word. And then she struggles, again, back to the Alice in Wonderland. She didn't really like that because that to her was not real. She likes things to be real.
She's a very grounded person. She's very grounded in reality.
Yes.
And
I
think so.
yes, but I think she was like too grounded in reality, so that she missed
And
reality
her
in some sense.
ambition, and she was also an.
She was trying too hard. That's it.
She's lost
She's
a little
very-
bit in this book. In this
Yeah.
book, she's searching even. Maybe
Yeah.
that's why it seems to meander so much.
Well, what was hard for, I remember talking to this male in Poland, And he could speak, of course, he spoke better English than I could speak Polish at the time. He said what was hard about learning the English language is all our, of course, we don't learn it, we just say it. And he says, but all the little words that you just turn like bit, bet, but, so just little, change a vowel in the word and understand what that is in the context. And he said that's what he struggled with the most. And I remember that for language, learning a language.
Yeah.
Because you said succinctness and say it simply and say it direct. And I think that's what the English language is about, being direct.
Well, English is a very rich language in words and meaning, much more so than a lot of other languages.
Oh, yes.
So when you speak English,
Very
you
adaptable.
can express yourself very deeply.
And you can make up words. You can make up words in English. And no other language that I've studied allows you to do that.
And there's a whole on the web, there's you can enter new words. It's constantly evolving, our language.
My mother didn't approve of that.
Whether they're slang or whatever.
Some slang was okay, but she did not like corruption of words. Like I was saying,
Oh, so if you shortened a word or...
yeah, one thing that bugged me about her writing was she would go from oblivion to oblivious to obliviousness, and the noun is oblivion, and to me, and I may be wrong in this, competitiveness, you could put competition in there and it works quite well, So to me, that's a pet peeve of mine. So I'm wanting to go, rather than continue on to make a word, you go back.
To the root of the word.
Yeah. If you want a noun, you go back to the noun. Anyway, that's just a pet peeve of mine because I think that keeps it more sharp and
It's
focused.
like using the word tenseness instead of tension. Why?
Exactly.
I've always wondered why, where did it come from? I've never heard of tenseness,
And to conference, we're going to conference.
to make verbs out of nouns, to parent.
And confer is a perfectly good word with less letters. No, I know. So that's the part of English that my mother and she instilled in me, this kind of purity of it. And Joseph Conrad wrote purely.
And he wrote Anglo-Saxon English. He didn't have that Latinate English that Orwell so hated. Why use a Latin word when you can use an Anglo-Saxon word? I really like this this question here, the gender one. How does gender affect this memoir? Consider the various gender roles at work in the memoir. How does Eva relate with her father and mother and sister? Beauty, femininity, and sexuality. She definitely doesn't feel as beautiful
As her sister.
in the States.
Oh.
But in Poland,
Right.
when she is
She was the
considered
beauty.
the beauty, she still says, but she looked at her sister and said, look at that dark hair, those big blue eyes. She felt that her sister was more beautiful than she was. But it was when they got to the States that her sister's beauty was more appreciated than her own. How did she take that, though? She wasn't happy when it was her sister, even though she herself had felt that to begin with.
And the whole cultural aspect of beauty.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she talked about that.
Yeah, she just said that, as you say, the cultural aspect of beauty changes from one country to another.
And from one age to another,
Yeah, that's right. She was getting older. And she was, if I may, if you want, 272, 273, 274 discusses her lack of, I don't believe in Polish anymore. I don't think in terms of...
Her what? I'm sorry?
272 and 273 is where she's finally saying, I can't I can't even remember some of the words. And she said, I talk to myself now, I talk in English. English is a language in which I've become an adult, in which I've seen my favorite movies, read my favorite novels, and sung along with Janis Joplin. In Polish, whole provinces of adult experience are missing. I don't know Polish word for microchips, or pathetic fallacy, or the importance of being earnest. If I tried talking to myself in my native language, it would be a stumbling conversation indeed, interlaced with English expressions. And then she goes on and develops that a little bit more. So that's why I think she finally became comfortable with English. Now, the idea of whether she gets comfortable in any language, that's a different question. You can't answer that.
Talking about her gender, though, the gender, I hope this doesn't sound too weird to people, but I got there wasn't she could have been a man. This could have been a man's memoir. There isn't a whole lot of her sexual identity, to me, that came through in what she wrote. Her focus was on something else. And she describes her lovers and her husband and her divorce and how she felt toward Marek when she was an adult. But still, it was the what happened to her. She doesn't describe sexuality much in the language, to me.
But I think when you talk about relationships, that her friend, the boyfriend, was a pure kind of friendship of people doing things, of children doing things together. But still how boys and girls at that age, he would play mean pranks on her, but she still, went with him.
Right, and I felt like that continued on. I felt like that continued on until she got when she touched on it briefly, her sexuality at Rice. With this boyfriend that she was kind of like a puppy dog after. The blonde Viking or whatever he was.
Which was the Polish, that the Polish ideal? Because when she's talking at the beginning of the book before she leaves Poland, and she talks about a Polish person, they were tall and blonde, right?
Yeah, no, I think she has a sexual identity, but I don't hear that in her voice. I don't know. It's hard to describe. The prose to me is asexual. Okay, that didn't go over well.
Interesting. Well, our book club, we talk sometimes about the novels we read in that, about a male getting the female voice.
Exactly.
Or vice versa.
Right.
And some
difficult.
male authors can do it really well, and some just can't capture the female voice. So, I mean, that is something you look at, is that gender voice, and how is that?
Right.
Is it real?
Right. And I felt there wasn't a whole lot about her as a woman in the book. Does that go over better?
I think it, yeah.
But when, this last part of the question, consider hypothetically how Marek's life in Canada and the U.S. would have differed from Eva's. I think it would have been very different.
Now, this is her friend.
The boy.
What number is that?
Number 7.
I really think that if he had come, that her experiences in ways were shaped and came out of her being female. I don't think the experiences, she doesn't write. I agree that she has, at times, a genderless voice.
Yeah.
But I never forgot for a minute when I was reading that book that she was a woman.
Yes.
And that she was female.
Yes, I understand. Because that wasn't the intent. It wasn't the intent for you to forget who she was. I knew she was a woman too, but I saw her life more as a person than as a woman.
Yes, but it would have differed if she had been male. I think her experiences would have been.
Do you think she would have focused on different experiences?
Yes.
And, do you have any examples? Or,
Probably.
I mean, hypothetically.
My copy of my book is sitting in my car. I
I don't, in many ways. I think she was a feminist in her time, it seems like, she wanted to be a writer, she wanted to do this.
Well, her
and-
mother, encouraged her to leave the mold behind.
Right.
Because her mother was unable to break that mold. But she shares things with other, she still has a very feminine background. How do I explain this? I mean, when she's talking about getting the magazines from America with the fashions in them.
I see.
There's a very
I must have glossed over the feminine part.
There's just, I was found that, and maybe because I'm a woman reading a woman's memoir, that it just, there were things there that I think were totally female, totally womanly. And if a man, and especially with the beauty and femininity, I don't think, I think that's important to her because she's a woman.
I just figured out, something just came to my mind about why I feel this way, because the prose,
It's strong.
it's so strong,
Yes.
and it's so in your face, that I guess that's what I felt. That was the, and because she was a woman, it wasn't, I don't know how to explain it.
She's not a romance writer.
It was the absence of femininity that made it asexual in her prose.
Okay.
Interesting, yes, good discussion, yeah. How do her parents feel about nostalgia? Great. Kind of talked about Eva, but I didn't think from the terms of her parents.
I got the feeling they embraced it pretty well. They were happy to come. That's the feeling I got. That they settled into suburban
But
Jewish
it was their
Vancouver.
decision. It wasn't her decision.
right,
And
that's-
that's what she's fighting against. A lot of the book is that it wasn't her decision. She
Right.
feels like she was forced into doing it.
Right, and that's why I was answering the question.
what's holding
Do you
her
think her
back.
parents feel the same way? And I think they were comfortable with the decision. And there's some description. Well, why would I want to go back? What is there? There is no there. And so forth. I think they felt very comfortable becoming suburban Jewish Vancouverites
But why do you immigrate?
or Vancouver Jews.
I remember, I was about, seventh grade, coming from North Dakota to Montana. You were, like a lot of us, immigrants to, okay. So why do you come to Montana? Why do you come? You have family? You love the beauty of the Bitterroot Valley? All of those things. So there are reasons people move, but sometimes it's because of family.
Right. I think it's harder
You
on
can leave
children.
family to come to family.
I think it's harder on children. I remember my mother saying, you'll never know what it feels like to be wrenched from your country.
True.
And she was an American through and through, but she never
But she
forget
came
that
at
feeling.
10, you said.
10.
Yeah, so she would have been in that same age group where, again, she didn't make the
Exactly.
decision.
Exactly.
to come.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, when we came, my children were a lot younger. They were 2, 3, and 4,
Right.
so they didn't feel that wrench. And we had made the decision to come, so that was okay too. But
We moved from Montana to California, and my eldest daughter was 10. She was so furious with us. She said when she was in California, she used to see license plates and say from Montana, and she'd say, "Those people know where to live." Whereas my younger children, who were she was 11, 6, and 1. The younger ones consider themselves Californians. They're not Montanans.
She was old enough that she had friends, and she'd
Exactly.
almost begun to make a life
Exactly.
for herself,
Exactly.
and even a life that was a little outside the family.
Exactly.
Whereas the other children hadn't reached that level.
Right. Right.
she
And I
had
think
her routines. She had her piano lessons and piano teacher,
Library.
and the park.
Make no mistake, my children are very proud that they were born in Montana. It's something they are very proud of. But they're not Montanans.
How does one become a Montanan?
Well, I don't know. As I
You
said,
have
my
to start
10-year-old,
speaking Montana.
Is that what, I have to call it a bag.
my 10-year-old was born in Australia, but she considered herself a Montanan.
Now, my kids consider themselves African Americans. But, okay, and then,
I don't understand that, grounded in particular historical and social events in a way that people from other generations might not have the same immigration experience. I don't quite understand that sentence.
So you'd like me to explain?
Yes. Oh, I didn't know whether you were technically part of this group.
Well, I'm just floating around.
Please.
But what I had in mind when I was writing that is there seem to be certain experiences that Eva's going through, or Eva's going through. For example, the way that her college peers are looking for a new sort of identity at the same time that she's trying to find her identity, and or for example, the fact that Ava and her family arrive to Vancouver at a point when there's already a core of Polish immigrants who have settled and have made it and are, essentially a different generation, you might say, in terms of their assimilation into Canadian culture, and that Eva and her family are arriving at a different stage, and so they're witnessing sort of a disconnection between the other Polish immigrants that have already arrived and have settled and have really made it for themselves and established a community. They're never quite part of that community upon arrival. They're sponsored, and then they're sort of ditched.
Well, they can never quite catch up.
Right, and so are there certain moments in this memoir that are sort of temporally defined, so that, for example, another example being that they leave Poland 1959, and could they have stayed? I mean, they couldn't really have stayed, because eventually everybody's going to be all the Jews are going to be forced out again. So, I mean, they might have had another 10 years in Poland if they didn't immigrate at that point. And so, is this a story that is marked by those boundaries? Whereas, say, now, 2006, someone moves from Poland, will they have gone through the same sorts of experiences? They wouldn't have kind of gone through this sort of countercultural revolution of the 60s. They wouldn't have been trapped by a different previous group of immigrants coming. So that was kind of what I had in mind.
Well, I think you answered your own question.
I know, but I wasn't supposed to do that.
Well, no, but I didn't understand it, but I do from the examples you, especially at Rice, when they were all undergoing this revolution, and she was undergoing her own personal revolution, and she was very preoccupied with herself.
Well, and you are 20-something, I call it the 20-something, excuse me, but it's the 20-something. And what is your preoccupation? It is with yourself.
especially when you go to college.
Yes, but there was, as I understood it, wasn't that, when was she in college?
Mid-60s?
Yeah.
Well, that's what I meant, there was a whole other agenda going on, that
Well,
even
it
if
was
you were
huge-
involved with yourself,
The
there was,
60s
yes,
was
there was a whole world out there that you were identified
And the
with.
Holocaust, too. I think, she feels herself later, well, when she's talking about why her parents' marriage is so strong and why they will always be together, because they went through the war together.
Right.
And that just forged a bond that is unbreakable. And those experiences, I think, are are time delineated and very, the different things you go through.
And she's in this weird in-between phase, historically speaking. She is not a survivor of this Holocaust, even though she's born from survivors, and doesn't quite know of her history. I mean, as much, at least from the memoir, we don't know how much of her history she really knows. And she, to me, it seems like she's got this nostalgia for a Poland that she doesn't really has never experienced as a child. I mean, she thought of it in this very romantic terms, and yet, that's not the Poland that her parents lived in, and so it's kind of she's in this very strange time period.
There's something else too. Most of us can remember growing up with all kinds of grandparents and aunts and uncles
that's right.
and a rich family tradition. Her mother and father had the majorities of their families killed in the Holocaust.
There is
They
no
had
sense of
spent a
continuity.
long time in hiding, and where they forged the bond you're talking about. They want something better for their children, and they do move, and they do seem to. The mother and father move ahead very well and make this life for these two daughters, but they don't talk a lot about the past. And so, in a way, Eva
Makes up her own.
Eva doesn't have a family history that many other people have, so maybe she is doing more searching. And then her parents had to leave Poland again out of fear of what this is, the changes in
Where things were
society
going.
on around them and what that might mean. And she was not quite to the point where she could understand that. So perhaps she's kind of twixt in between being
I agree.
moored somewhere, if that makes sense.
Yes,
I
it
don't
does,
know.
for me.
And I mean, there's even a moment where she talks about how strange it is to see grandparents, like the Orlovskis, or who, I can't remember which group of family friends in Poland, but there are grandparents around in that picture, and no one else has grandparents. And there is no family history, really. It's very striking, I think.
There's a disconnect between her and where she came from, and it's like everything started with her parents, because she has nothing further back than that.
I got I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I got a strong feeling she never really connected with her identity. That's when I started, one of the first comments I made was, I didn't think she felt comfortable in her skin. I never got, the language, like you said, was not comfortable.
I think she was doing it in Krakow, and when she talks in the first part of the book about Krakow, all these little vignettes, memories that to her, and they're all great in some way. In some way, she's showing, how good this was and what she felt there, what a perfect feeling that was.
Right. It didn't sound that bad to me.
Where she knew everything. She had total knowledge under that tree. I think that she came to see that, especially, and then leaving it, she just came to see that as perfection, and she was torn away from it, and she resented it.
And you can't go home again, so she was stuck in limbo.
No, you can't go home again because English became her language. She couldn't think in Polish. When she goes back and she sees those friends, and she sees how different they are, and you can't go back.
Is it how different they are, or how different she is?
She's become.
She's become.
And that would have
It's
happened
both.
anyway,
Yeah,
because she
it's
would have
both,
grown
yeah.
up and, become different. But everything in Poland is frozen in her mind at the age of 13.
And yet it is.
And she knows what political events are taking place and all of that, but it doesn't really matter. I don't
I was thinking that now might be a good time to sort of transition back to the larger group. So, finish up your
Could we have a
current
5-minute break?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, get up, stretch your legs, do what you need to do, and
We need to make more coffee.
then come back and then 5. How about
You know what that means, right?
what's
If you say 5, well, you're a professor, you should know.
I mean 4 minutes and 30 seconds when I say 5.
Wow. You have a really interesting table here. You've been to Poland and as an exchange student. And this lady obviously has an interesting background. This is really fun.
I need more pain medicine.
As soon as we get home, I've noticed much better than
Yeah, I can feel
just right through the little bit swollen. Not huge.
well, the glands on this side are swollen.
Yeah. And I think that's probably to be expected. Swollen glands, no matter what causes it.
It was kind of refreshing.
It's about
So are you from North Dakota? Since you made that remark.
Yes.
Yes?
I say it and I expect the chuckles, but. From, what, 54 to 68. So,
That's a long time.
14 years, 13, 14 years. So those formative years, so kind of like her, she left Poland. And you don't have much say when you're 13 years old. Because you're still part of your family and it's what your parents decide. Now you hear more of kids being juniors in high school and their families will move, but the child will stay in the community. Now you hear a lot of that at being like 16, 17. We're talking about how much say do you have really as a child? Still not much. You're still dependent on your parents till you get about 16. Because you'll hear stories of, well, the folks moved to Kalispell and the son's still here going to high school.
Well, my oldest son, I guess a lot of his life was spent in Rochester, New York. And we moved from there to Salt Lake City.
It's a
But
culture
my
shock.
oldest son had just 1 year of high school left, so
Yeah.
he stayed there. Then he went to college there. Then he married a girl from there.
So
And
he's
his-
planted there, is that?
Yeah, he's planted there and has his sons
Is that 5
there.
minutes?
Oh, yeah.
That was 5 minutes, okay.
Yeah.
I've gotten the go-ahead to bring the discussion back to a
Whereas
group.
my other children are in Salt Lake City.
Oh, sure.
Turn on the microphone.
Turn down? I don't think so.
Do I just need to speak directly into the microphone? Okay. I hope that these discussion questions served kind of as a springboard for more discussion amongst yourselves at your tables. As I circulated around, I heard a lot of very interesting ideas, some confusion over the wording of some of my questions, so maybe they weren't quite so clear as they could have been, but that's part of the fun, right? Because if you can't understand it, you can make up your own question, or you can read it the way you want to read it. Like these books, you can read it the way you want to read it. Anyway, I was thinking that we've got two options. We can choose a question that I choose from this list and kind of discuss how the different groups reacted to that question, or if the different groups felt like there were a particular question that we can vote on a question. But this is your discussion as much as it is mine, so unless I hear otherwise, we're going to question number 2 and questions 2 and 3.
Okay.
All in favor?
But I have a question.
Sure.
At the time that Christianity and Judaism split, at the time of Christ, were the Holy Lands considered European, Asian? What were they, what culture or what experience did they come out of?
Let me preface my remarks by saying that I'm not a historian. Although I am a classicist, I would say that it would have been Palestine under Roman occupation at that time period to begin with. But go ahead.
Jerusalem was there, right?
Oh yeah, Jerusalem is there, but when does but this is really under Roman occupation towards the end of Roman occupation. The temple is going to be sacked in 70 CE for the second time. So this is a pretty heavily Greco-Roman culture, we might say, that's in control of it. But just because it's part of the Roman world doesn't mean it is European. I think that it's Mediterranean or Near Eastern or something along those lines. It's not really a Western world yet. But, yeah.
There wasn't much of a West as we.
That's right.
Jerusalem changed hands about 18 times in its history. Different wars and things, so it's very, many cultures.
Where the government may have been Roman, it was really more Hellenistic.
That's right. That's right. Here's my little bit of Roman history spiel for you. The strength of the Roman Empire, when it had its strength, was derived from the fact that the Roman provincial governors would move into a province and would do as much as they could to let the local government exist and keep their hands out of local politics, essentially. And as long as you were paying your taxes to Rome, then everything was fine. And the problem in Jerusalem was that paying taxes was equated with obeisance to an imperial god. And so it was always a thorn in the Roman imperial government's side. But that's a different time.
I'm curious why you asked the question. What do you have to do?
Well, what it has to do with the book is the mindset of the Jewish culture, whether it was more Western or more Eastern. And to me, it's more Eastern than European and Western. But I was
I'm
curious,
sorry, you
I
said
didn't
more Eastern or?
In my, the way I would look at it, I would think it was more Eastern, inward-looking, bigger picture kind of looking than Western, which is a little more outward-looking and more
Yeah. Well, the question that comes to my mind when we're talking about the role of Israel in this memoir is really how swiftly in the memoir the decision is made not to go to Israel. And I found it quite interesting that after so many people in Poland were telling Ava and her family that this is our new homeland, this is our real home, that they immediately said, there won't be war in Canada. We're moving to Canada. I don't know if anybody else reacted in the same sort of way or had the same sort of impression, but I'd be interested in hearing comments.
We talked a little bit about what her life might have been like if she had moved to Israel, and if her life would have been less of a translation, sort of, or there would have been less dissonance between what her life in Canada and what it might have been. I mean, that was pure speculation.
Right.
It seemed that there would have been a lot more people like her,
Yeah.
for instance, in Israel.
On the other hand, everybody that she knows in Israel suffers tremendously. So.
It seems like that her family is fairly non-religious, and I presume it's that way with the non-religious. It's that way with Reform, if my memory is correct, that they were less excited about establishing Israel than all of the rest of
No. Zionists generally were secular as could be.
Yeah, but Israel is set up as a
Religious
rigid
focus.
state.
Mass came much later.
It's more nationalist. Than a religious one.
Yeah, yes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Anita.
We're way off subject.
But, yes, sir.
Were you wondering about Ava's parents' decision to go to way out in Vancouver rather than to Israel like so many of their peers did from Poland? How they made that choice?
I was curious about that.
My way of explaining that, which we touched on, I think, here, was that her father was a contrarian in everything he ever did.
Yeah.
But he also had somebody sponsoring him in Vancouver.
And he didn't want war.
You know, the father would have probably done better, I think, in Israel. He liked that kind of Wild West sort of way of living, going against convention and kind of black market stuff. And, you know, as a brand new country, it certainly wasn't as sedate as Vancouver. Did I interrupt you? I'm sorry.
No.
I think that that we do certainly get that sort of impression from the memoir too. That when we see the family's new life in Vancouver, it seems like the father is sort of atrophying a little bit. That he doesn't have the same sort of challenges that he once had. Yeah. So, but let's focus in a little bit on the role of Judaism in Ava's life. Can we attribute the decision to move to Canada as a decision that marks their Jewish identity?
I thought it marked the lack thereof. I just didn't think and I think the further you got in the book, the less important it was to Eva. She didn't seem to find her roots in Judaism. She came to her schooling and whatever, her friends. It was not important. She married a non-Jewish man. She was very secular in my opinion. I didn't see Judaism playing a big role in this at all.
You mean as a religion?
As a religion, not as a nationality, culture.
I did have a question, which was the more important tension for her, was whether it was being Polish, being a Polish immigrant, or was it whether it was being a Jewish girl, which was the most important thing. But on the other hand, I wondered to what extent was the societal category of Jew that was enforced upon her, did that inform or create some of the tensions that she was living in?
Any responses to that?
I thought it was really telling when her friends bring her to the Catholic churches and she learns to cross herself, and then her mother has to inform her that she's Jewish and that she didn't do that. And for me, that was one of the most telling statements in that book. I mean, she did not know not to do that because she was Jewish. She had to be told that by her mother, which I thought was really interesting.
I think you have to distinguish between being Jewish as a religion and being Jewish as, as a culture.
Way of life.
And also being externally defined as Jewish. You're Jewish, and therefore, you're going to have to be told. You're Jewish, and therefore, well, maybe we're going to make you hang out with those people and not with us. Maybe we're not going to maybe invite you into our circle so well. You see, I'm saying, I wonder whether that what she calls the sociological category of being Jew, is that more important or less important than the sociological category of immigrant?
They were totally braided together,
I think.
Would she have immigrated had she not been part of this category?
Yeah, being Jewish, no, I don't think they would have.
How would, let's go back to life in Poland for a moment, in Ava's memoir, that is. And we have this one example of Ava as a child crossing herself in front of the church and her mom having to have a talk with her about that not being what Jews do. And then there's round 2 of that with her younger sister. Apparently the message was only conveyed to one daughter at a time, who prays to a light switch, right? What other moments in the memoir directly address life in Poland as a Jew in a spiritual sort of way or a religious sort of way? Anything come to mind?
Other than they were singled out for killing, I don't know.
There was that incident where there was another child in the school that they were all teasing the child, and the child's father calls them all together and singles Ava out.
That's right.
And so
Yeah.
like, you're the Jew, therefore you must be the troublemaker. You're the
Yeah.
leader.
This still seems to be about cultural connotations, though. Is there any discussion at all about going to the synagogue or holidays celebrated?
But there is. They keep those central holidays. They walk to the synagogue. There's a part of their culture that they always keep within them that defines them as different from everyone else around them, I think.
Yeah, there are those moments at the holidays. There's one example where on Yom Kippur, Ava is taken to a restaurant and fed a pork chop, which in this supreme act of taboo breaking and defiance, and she's embarrassed to tell her parents about it. And it becomes very interesting how the experiences at the synagogue are described as being opportunities for reflection on their most recent history more than anything else. They're going to the synagogue to remember the lost, it seems to me. And Yom Kippur is one of those few days in the year where there is there's a service devoted to remembering the lost. So it seems that at the most spiritual, and this is of course my reading of the memoir, at their most spiritual, they're linked to a historical or social event, and so it's less about atoning or celebrating a new year or remembering the Holy Land or anything like that than it is about thinking about destruction and reflecting on it. But yeah.
They also do the Sabbath to a certain extent. I'm looking at the bottom of page 55, and then man comes to our house every Friday. He's Jewish and he lost both his parents. Now he lives in an orphanage, and my parents invite him in the whole Jewish tradition of taking and meeting strangers on the Sabbath.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yeah.
But I mean, this is what you're saying. I think the way that she talks about it in the novel or in the memoir is very coded, and I think that's just because it must have been. I think that's showing an awareness of the fact that it must have just been dangerous to even write those words, to speak, about the Sabbath, and what does that mean when you say, oh, I'm observing the Sabbath this week, So,
Yeah.
When you're speaking about a spiritual kind of Judaism, I guess I read no sign of it in the book, as several people are describing. And I guess I'm thinking about when she's in their apartment in Krakow and she's avidly listening while she's in bed late at night or for her late at night as a kid, to the adults' conversations. And there's a steady flow of neighbors and friends. And she reports different things they're talking about. At least what I remember, this is my memoir of the memoir, is that it was about politics and current events, never about their Judaism. They felt believing way. They went through they perform some Jewish rituals because they're culturally Jews. They're not, in my mind, religious Jews.
I would agree they're not religious Jews, but I think the rhythm of time and the calendar was Jewish. I think they marked time by the Sabbath, by holidays starting at sundown, for instance. You don't know what rituals, but I bet a lot of those parties and the dancing and the drinking and the staying up late and the discussions were Friday nights. So it was elementally Jewish in a certain way, although not spiritually so.
I would agree with that.
There are also two planes. I mean, there's what occurred and how the life was, right? And then there's how she's writing about it as a memoir and what she's adding to it and what emotion and relation she's adding. The only passages I thought that felt somehow spiritual is when she's talking about music. I mean, it really wasn't...
Or language, I would, yeah.
And yeah.
And the spirituality of her childhood, to a certain extent, too. Emotion.
It is striking because if we compare it to, say, that conversation she has with her childhood friend about how she wants to become a saint. And so there must be children running around with some sort of spirituality, maybe not from the Jewish community, but it is a spiritual world that they're living in. Perhaps it's not quite fair though to dwell on a distinction between living a spiritual life as a Jew and living a life culturally as a Jew. Once they arrive in Vancouver, there again the issue of religiosity, I guess we could say, arises. There's a point when Ava's younger sister becomes much more religiously active than perhaps the rest of the family and wants to start keeping kosher. Is that right? How does that fit into the experience, the immigrants' experience, or the Jewish immigrants' experience? Yeah.
I mean, it certainly goes against the idea if what they were trying to do was to assimilate, for her to become more Jewish and more part of that and more ritual following, goes against the idea of assimilating into a new community.
The decision to keep kosher is probably one of the least assimilating type of religious practices you can decide to do. It marks you as separate and distinct, and depending on the degree to which you observe, keeps you from having dinner with your friends who might not be observant enough for your tastes. That's a bad pun, I suppose.
That was a good one.
But I think that the experience, though, is an interesting one in which it's almost as if it's a reverse assimilation, that this is Elaine at that time, right? That's the sister's new name.
Right.
Right. Elaine is trying to force herself into a different community, and it's not necessarily the Canadian community, the larger Canadian community that she's assimilating herself into. I found it to be a very interesting sort of detail that's included in the memoir, but. I think that we can start wrapping this up a little bit. Were there other questions that you might have addressed as groups that you think you'd like to bring to the larger group? You all just want to go home? Yes.
I have one question. Do you think that if Eva's family had been more of a, given her more of a spiritual Jewish experience, that perhaps she would not have been quite so much searching for an identity?
That's a good question. My immediate response is that I'm not surprised by the lack of spirituality in this memoir at all. I think it would have been extremely telling if survivors of the Holocaust were able to get out and with the next generation and felt strongly about their beliefs in God. I think that is a pretty minority sort of reaction to the terrors of the Holocaust. And it, to me, it seems like a very I don't know exactly how to say it, but I think that I'm just not surprised by the lack of spirituality. She is lacking a connection, though, to something. She's lacking a historical connection. She's lacking a cultural connection. She's displaced in any number of ways, and yet she's completely preoccupied with her position and her status. And I think that her struggle is to find some sort of position and some status. And you know, is she successful? Does she ever ground herself? It seems like a very hard thing to get your hands on, but yeah.
She's trying to live it in her head. I think she was very successful in the end in assimilating and succeeding, finding a place. She became a successful writer. She became successful. I mean, she made lots of money. I don't know, in this society, she was a success. She got to Harvard. She did everything she set out to do, it seemed.
But did she find her voice?
Here it is. I think she said to her mother that I finally become an American because I'm undergoing therapy.
Yeah.
I think that was good. See, and to me, this I haven't finished the book, but I'm about 3/4 of the way through it. To me, it was very sad. She has been grounded, at least up to the point that I've read it. And her constant concern about her positioning and who she is makes me feel that she isn't grounded. And I would be surprised if she ever does find joy in her life. I haven't finished the book, so I don't know where to go.
I was just going to make a comment, and she doesn't really talk about it. She talks about finding her voice and assimilation and her identity. She doesn't talk about finding happiness. Her father says, try to be happy. So the question is, she may be successful. I don't get the sense that she's a happy person, but I don't know that that's important to her. At one point in the book, she talks about needing to hold on to the sorrow of her parents' generation. And so, you know, is success happiness as well as all those other things? I don't know.
And I really felt that the essential, if I could say one word that really got this, is meaning. It's like she kept trying to find meaning. What does this mean? How does it mean? How does it translate? Well, lost in translation, right? I think that she kept trying to find a center that kept shifting. You know, as it, like she goes to away to college, it shifts. She goes to New York, it shifts. And so she's always trying to find a balance, but balance doesn't mean unity. Balance means you can have all sorts of different aspects of yourself hanging out there, but you find a center.
Yeah.
I don't mean this in a frivolous way, but one of the things that I said at the table was that to me, it felt like she was just trying too hard. You know, she didn't ever seem like she was relaxed and just enjoying the moment. She was always trying too hard.
In her head.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she had a future as a therapy patient.
Yeah.
When she stopped dreaming in her native language and started dreaming in English and started, her mind was totally, she made that transition to me when she completely thought in English. And that to me was a part of her success. She was a person that studied music, which is another language, and was successful at it. Now she's studied English, and she's been successful at it. She has conquered that transition in a real way. How could she be a writer and being paid a lot of money if she wasn't thinking in English? I don't think you can. I mean, I just, so that was her struggle, and I also have a hard time. She moved when she was 13 years old, which has got to be one of the most difficult times in a girl's life. And so that's all on top of that, all the angst of being a teenager is all layered, all in that whole book. And that's universal.
Yeah, and so we see that even if we try to pick out the particularities out of the memoir and what makes Ava's story unique to her and her history, there are certain elements of it that apply to more than just herself as an individual. That her struggle for identity is something that many people struggle with, and it's often associated with times of life, growing up, teenage angst, moving off to college. It doesn't have to be tied to persecution, political exile, or anything like that. But there is resonance. We feel a certain resonance there.
Good evening. The time is now 8:45. At this time, please acknowledge your selections to the checkout desk. The library will be closing in 15 minutes. In 10 minutes, the internet computers will be closing down automatically. The library will close in 15 minutes.
So there.
And yeah, so that there are certain universals to the story that we can kind of tease out, but at the same time, I think that part of the richness of this memoir is the detail, and especially I would say in the first part of it, that this first part just does a tremendous job outlining the sorts of tensions that are going to follow Ava around for the rest of her life. But at any rate, I think I'm going to just leave it at that. Anybody want the final word? No? Good.
Thank you.
The next book that we'll be discussing is Mr. Samler's Planet by Saul Bellow, and we'll be discussing it 3 weeks from now. Anybody know what the date is?
No, it's October 6th.
October 4th? Okay, so
No, I'll be there.
I'll see you then.
I'm supposed to be the 4th. Not carpet meal, seize the day. It's small. I like big books. My father always says to me, I like big books.